The darkness of space stretched before the viewing deck of the Aurora's edge, a canvas of stars, punctuated by the fading light of Helion. Captain Lyra Oren stood motionless, her reflection ghostly against the reinforced glass. The once brilliant primary star of the Helion system now flickered like a dying ember, its light diminishing with each passing day. "Captain, we're approaching the outer boundary of the Helion system," First Pilot Jade Mercer announced, her voice carrying a tension that had become all too familiar aboard the ship. Lyra nodded without turning. "Maintain course. I want to see it with my own eyes." The year was 3421, and humanity had spread across the galaxy, establishing colonies on thousands of worlds. The Galactic Alliance, formed centuries ago, had overseen humanity's expansion beyond Earth's solar system. But now, a crisis loomed. Nuclear energy resources were depleting faster than they could be replenished, and entire star systems depended on stable stellar radiation for survival. And then the stars began to go dark. Visual confirmation of Helion Prime's diminished output. The ship's artificial intelligence, Sable, reported. Its voice was smooth, almost musical, yet devoid of the concern that gripped the human crew. Current luminosity at 27% of normal parameters and decreasing at an accelerated rate. Lyra finally turned from the viewport, her features hardened by years of command and scientific inquiry. At 42, she was one of the Alliance's most decorated officers, with specializations in astrophysics and xenobiology. The mission to Helion represented everything she had trained for, and everything she feared. "Prepare the landing team," she ordered. "I want boots on Helion 4 within 12 hours. That's where the last transmission originated." The command center hummed with activity as her officers coordinated the approach. Jade, a woman whose skills as a pilot were matched only by her loyalty to Lyra, programmed the descent vectors with practiced efficiency. "Captain," Jade began, her fingers pausing over the controls. Command's directives were clear. We're to observe and report back. No intervention without explicit authorization. Lyra's jaw tightened. "People are dying down there. Jade, the Alliance can debate protocols while we gather facts on the ground." The two women locked eyes, years of friendship and shared missions creating an unspoken language between them. Jade had lost her younger brother to an energy crisis on a frontier world 3 years prior. The memory of that loss colored every decision she made. "Yes, Captain," Jade finally conceded, returning to her calculations. Sable's holographic form materialized beside the command console, a humanoid silhouette of light with no distinct features, beyond a vague suggestion of eyes. "Captain Oren, I must register a concern. Our sensors are detecting unusual radiation patterns emanating from Helion Prime. These do not match any known stellar behavior in our database." Lyra approached the AI's projection. "Can you isolate the signature?" "Negative. It appears to be a hybrid radiation, part traditional stellar emissions, part something else entirely. I would classify it as dark radiation, but that would be an imprecise term." "Dark radiation," Lyra repeated, the scientist in her already forming hypotheses. "Like dark matter and dark energy?" "Conceptually similar, but distinct," Sable replied. "This appears to be an active force rather than a passive presence in space." The ship shuddered suddenly, causing several crew members to grab onto nearby stations for stability. "What was that?" Lyra demanded. Jade's hands flew across her console. "Gravitational anomaly. Massive but brief. Gone now." Lyra strode to the primary sensor array, her mind racing. "Sable, run a full spectral analysis of Helion Prime. I want to know if what we're seeing is a natural stellar phenomenon or something else entirely." "Analysis will take approximately 17 minutes, the AI responded. As the ship continued its approach to Helion 4, Lyra retreated to her private quarters. The room was Spartan, with few personal effects beyond a collection of ancient texts on data tablets, her one indulgence. Among them was a rare copy of the Archon Codex, a compilation of myths and legends from the early space exploration era, before the formation of the Alliance. She activated the tablet, searching for any mention of stars disappearing. The Archon texts were considered pseudoscience by most modern academics, but Lyra had always found value in the intersection of myth and observable phenomena. Often, ancient observers lacked the scientific vocabulary to describe what they witnessed, but their observations remained valid. Her search yielded a single reference, a passage about entities called sky eaters, cosmic beings that consumed the light of stars. According to the text, they had visited the galaxy once before, thousands of years ago, leaving several systems dark before mysteriously departing. Folklore, Lyra muttered to herself, but a chill ran down her spine nonetheless. Her comm unit chimed. "Captain, to the bridge," Jade's voice announced. "We're receiving a distress signal from the surface." Lyra returned to the command center, where the main display showed a grainy transmission. A haggard man appeared, his features barely visible in the dim emergency lighting. "This is Governor Tal of Helion 4, the man said, his voice breaking with exhaustion. "Our star is dying. Crops are failing. Temperature is dropping catastrophically. The other planets in our system have already gone silent. We are the last. Please, if anyone receives this..." The transmission cut out abruptly. "That was sent 3 days ago," Jade informed her. "No further communication since then." Lyra's decision was immediate. "Accelerate our approach. Prepare emergency supplies and the medical team. Sable, what's the current population of Helion 4? "Approximately 2.7 million inhabitants." The AI responded. "Primarily concentrated in the equatorial regions, where agriculture was most sustainable." "Was," Lyra noted grimly, "past tense." 12 hours later, the Aurora's Edge entered orbit around Helion 4. From space, the planet appeared shrouded in darkness, with only scattered points of artificial light marking the locations of major settlements. Lyra led the landing team personally, bringing Jade as pilot and a select group of specialists. Their shuttle descended through the atmosphere, buffeted by unusually strong winds. "The climate is already changing," noted Dr. Eno Veris, the team's planetary specialist and a native of the Helion system. His dark skin contrasted with the stark white of his medical uniform. "Without the star's radiation, the atmospheric regulators can't maintain balance." As they broke through the cloud cover, the devastation became apparent. The capital city of Helion 4, once a gleaming metropolis of crystal and light, now sat in near darkness. Emergency generators provided minimal illumination, creating islands of light in a sea of shadow. They landed in a central plaza, where a small delegation awaited them. Governor Tal was even more haggard in person than in his transmission, his eyes sunken and his movements sluggish. "Captain Orin," he greeted her, his voice barely above a whisper. "You came." "The Alliance responds to all distress calls," Lyra assured him, though she knew the political reality was far more complicated. "Tell me everything that's happened." As they walked to the government complex, Tal recounted the events of the past month. Helion Prime had begun to dim gradually at first, almost imperceptibly. Scientists had initially attributed it to a stellar cycle, but the dimming had accelerated rapidly. Within weeks, the other planets in the system, closer to the star than Helion 4, had reported similar phenomena before going silent. "And there were the dreams," Tal added, almost as an afterthought. Lyra stopped walking. "Dreams?" Many citizens reported the same dream, a vast darkness moving across the sky, consuming everything in its path. Our psychologists dismissed it as mass anxiety, but... He trailed off, looking up at the faint outline of Helion Prime, barely visible in the darkened sky. "But now you're not so sure," Lyra finished for him. The governor nodded solemnly. In the government complex, powered by the last of the emergency generators, Lyra established a temporary command post. Dr. Varys began coordinating with local medical staff, while Jade set up communications with the Aurora's Edge in orbit. "Sable, what do we know?" Lyra asked through her comlink. The AI's voice came through clearly. "Captain, I have completed my analysis of Helion Prime. The star is not dying in the conventional sense. It is being consumed." A chill ran down Lyra's spine as she recalled the Archon text. "Consumed how?" "Unknown. But the dark radiation appears to be extracting energy directly from the star's core. It's as if something is feeding on it." Lyra shared a look with Jade, who had overheard the conversation. "The Sky Eaters," Lyra whispered. "Captain," Jade questioned. "An old myth. I need to see the oldest records this colony has. Historical archives, indigenous knowledge, anything from the original settlement." Governor Tal directed them to the Planetary Archive, a vast underground complex designed to withstand any natural disaster. As they descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. "We're diverting most remaining power to life support and agricultural domes," Tal explained. "The archives run on a separate system, but it's minimal." In the dim light of the archive, Lyra and her team discovered records dating back to the original colonization of the Helion system, nearly 500 years earlier. Among them were journals from the first settlers, who had encountered an indigenous species on Helion 4, not sentient by Alliance definitions, but possessors of a complex communication system based on chemical exchanges. The indigenous life forms shared information with the settlers. Lyra read aloud from a digital transcript. They conveyed, through chemical signals translated by our xenobiologists, a warning about the time of darkness. According to their evolutionary memory, it comes every 5,000 years. "Evolutionary memory?" Jade questioned. Dr. Varys interjected. "Some species encode historical events in their genetic material. It's rare, but not unprecedented. These indigenous organisms might have experienced the last occurrence of whatever is happening now." Lyra continued reading, growing more concerned with each passage. The original settlers had largely dismissed the warnings as primitive superstition, focusing instead on building their colony. But they had recorded everything meticulously, including chemical formulas that represented the indigenous warning signals. "Sable," Lyra transmitted. "I'm sending you a chemical sequence. Analyze it against what we know about the dark radiation." Minutes passed as the AI processed the information. Finally, Sable responded. "Captain, there is a 78.3% correlation between the chemical signature and the dark radiation pattern. The indigenous species was attempting to warn about the current phenomenon." Governor Tal, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "Can your ship's sensors detect what's causing this? Is there anything physical we can fight?" "We need to get closer to Helion Prime," Lyra decided. "Whatever is happening, the answers are there." Back aboard the Aurora's Edge, Lyra convened her senior officers. The plan she proposed was dangerous, bringing the ship into close proximity to the dying star to gather direct readings. Alliance protocol explicitly forbids this kind of intervention without headquarters approval. Her security chief reminded her. "Note your objection," Lyra acknowledged. "But by the time we receive authorization, this entire system could be lost. I'm invoking emergency command authority." No one else objected. They had all seen the conditions on Helion 4, the desperation in the eyes of its people. As the Aurora's Edge broke orbit and set course for Helion Prime, Lyra received a priority communication from Alliance headquarters. Chairman Voken's stern visage filled the screen. "Captain Oren," he began, without preamble. "Our long-range sensors have detected your ship's movement toward Helion Prime. You are ordered to maintain observation distance only." Lyra stood straight, meeting his gaze. "Sir, with respect, the situation here is unprecedented. We have reason to believe this is not a natural phenomenon, but something that could threaten other systems if left unchecked." "Your concern is noted, Captain, But the Alliance Scientific Council requires more data before authorizing closer investigation. Return to your assigned position. People are dying, sir. Vulcan's expression hardened. The Alliance must consider the greater good, Captain. One system versus potential risk to our entire fleet if we lose the Aurora's edge to whatever is affecting Hylian Prime. Return to your position. That's an order. The transmission ended before Lyra could respond. He's afraid, Jade observed from her station. Yes, Lyra agreed. But fear makes for poor science and worse humanity. She turned to her communications officer. Send a message to headquarters acknowledging their order. And our course? The navigation officer asked. Lyra hesitated only briefly. Unchanged. Take us closer to Hylian Prime. As the Aurora's edge approached the star, its instruments began to detect anomalies that defied conventional astrophysics. The dark radiation increased exponentially, and gravitational readings fluctuated wildly. Captain, Sable announced, I am detecting a presence within the star's corona. It appears to be a physical entity, but unlike anything in our database. On screen, Lyra ordered. The main display showed a section of Hylian Prime's surface. At first, nothing seemed unusual beyond the star's diminished brightness. Then, slowly, a pattern emerged, a darker region that moved against the stellar flows, as if swimming through the plasma. Magnify, Lyra commanded, her voice barely a whisper. The image zoomed in, revealing a vast, amorphous entity. It seemed to be composed of the same material as the star itself, but darker, more dense. As they watched, it appeared to draw stellar material into itself, growing slightly larger. It's feeding, Dr. Varus breathed, his scientific curiosity overcoming his horror. Sable analysis, Lyra demanded. The entity appears to be converting stellar energy into dark energy, which it incorporates into its structure. It is, effectively, transforming the star's mass and light into darkness. A sky eater, Lyra murmured. Jade looked at her questioningly. The Archon text, Lyra explained. It described entities that consumed stars, leaving systems dark. We thought it was myth, but we're witnessing it. Can we communicate with it? Dr. Varus asked. Unknown, Sable responded. It exists primarily in a state that our communication systems cannot access. However, it appears to react to energy patterns. It may be possible to influence its behavior through controlled energy emissions. Lyra's mind raced through possibilities. If it feeds on energy, perhaps we can create a more attractive energy source. Draw it away from Hylian Prime. The ship's fusion core, Jade suggested. It's the most concentrated energy source we have. That would put the Aurora's edge at extreme risk, the security chief objected. We need something that emits energy in a pattern similar to a star, but controllable, Lyra mused. Sable, can we modify our deflector array to project a concentrated energy field that mimics stellar radiation? Theoretically, yes. The AI confirmed. However, it would require reconfiguring our primary power distribution system. The ship would be vulnerable during the procedure and would operate at reduced capacity afterward. How long? Approximately 3 hours for the reconfiguration. Lyra nodded decisively. Begin immediately. Jade, plot a course that will position us at the optimal distance from both Hylian Prime and the entity. As the engineering team worked to modify the ship's systems, Lyra returned to her quarters to study the Archon text more closely. There had to be additional information about these Sky Eaters, something that might help them understand what they were facing. She found a reference to an ancient artifact, a meteorite fragment discovered in the early days of space exploration, bearing inscriptions that related to the Sky Eaters. According to the text, the fragment had been preserved in a museum on Hylian 4. Lyra immediately contacted Governor Tal, who confirmed that the Planetary Museum did indeed house such an artifact. Though it had never been considered particularly significant, just one of many space curiosities collected over the centuries. While the ship's modifications continued, Lyra took a shuttle back to the surface with Dr. Varys to examine the artifact. The museum stood in darkness, its power diverted to more critical needs. But the governor's authorization granted them access. The meteorite fragment was small, no larger than Lyra's palm, encased in a preservation field. The inscriptions on its surface were unlike any language currently known to the Alliance, consisting of intricate swirls and geometric patterns. "Sable," Lyra transmitted. "I'm sending you images of this inscription. Cross-reference with all known languages and symbolic systems." The AI's response came minutes later. The symbols bear some resemblance to patterns observed in ancient stellar cartography from the pre-Alliance era. They appear to be a form of three-dimensional mapping rather than traditional language. A map, Lyra realized. But to what? "If I interpret the patterns correctly," Sable continued, "they indicate a path or trajectory through space, specifically, the path taken by the entities you call Sky Eaters. Can you project their course based on this map?" "Partially. The map is incomplete, but it suggests the entities move along specific energy currents in space, similar to how oceanic creatures follow thermal currents." "And if we disrupted those currents?" Lyra asked, the beginnings of a plan forming in her mind. "Theoretically, it could alter their course." Lyra turned to Dr. Varys. "We need to get back to the ship immediately." Upon their return, they found the modifications to the Aurora's Edge nearly complete. Jade met them in the shuttle bay, her expression grave. "Alliance headquarters has sent 3 patrol vessels to intercept us," she reported. "They'll arrive within 12 hours. "Then we have 12 hours to save this system," Lyra replied firmly. In the command center, she outlined her plan to her senior officers. Using the modified deflector array, they would create an energy field that mimicked stellar radiation, but contained subtle disruptions, patterns designed to interfere with the Sky Eater's feeding process and potentially drive it away from Helion Prime. "This is completely untested," the security chief pointed out. "Everything about this situation is unprecedented," Lyra countered. "We adapt, or we watch billions die across this sector if these entities move to other stars." No one argued further. With the modifications complete, the Aurora's Edge positioned itself between Helion Prime and the entity. At Lyra's command, the deflector array activated, projecting a controlled energy field into space. At first, nothing happened. The entity continued its feeding pattern, drawing more of the star's energy into itself. "Increase power to the deflector," Lyra ordered. "Adjust the disruption pattern according to Sable's calculations." The ship's engines strained as more power was diverted to the deflector array. The energy field intensified, creating a visible distortion in space between the ship and the entity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the Sky Eater began to react. Its amorphous form rippled, and its feeding pattern became erratic. "It's responding," Jade reported, monitoring the sensors. "The entity is shifting position." "Is it moving away from Helion Prime?" Lyra asked tensely. "Negative," Sable answered. "It appears to be changing direction. Captain, it's moving toward us." The realization struck Lyra with terrible clarity. "We've made ourselves a more attractive target." "Evasive maneuvers?" Jade asked, hands poised over the controls. Lyra's mind raced. "No. Maintain position. Increase power to the deflector array. If it's attracted to our energy, we'll use that." "Captain," the security chief questioned. "We're going to trap it," Lyra explained. "Sable, reconfigure the deflector array to create a containment field, something that will hold the entity when it approaches. Such a configuration would require redirecting power from all major systems, including life support," the AI warned. "And there is no guarantee it will succeed." "Do it," Lyra commanded. "Jade, prepare an emergency evacuation protocol for the crew if this fails." As Sable reconfigured the ship's systems, the entity accelerated toward them, drawn by the concentrated energy field. The Aurora's edge trembled as power surged through circuits never designed for such output. "Containment field ready," Sable announced. "Awaiting entity contact." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the amorphous darkness approached. Lyra stood firm, watching the main display as the distance closed. "On my mark," she said steadily. 3, 2, 1, activate containment field." The deflector array pulsed brilliantly, projecting a spherical energy field around the ship. As the entity made contact with the field, a blinding flash erupted, temporarily overloading the visual sensors. When the display cleared, the entity appeared trapped within the energy field, its form writhing as if in distress. "It's working," Jade breathed. But the victory was short-lived. Warning signals blared across the command console. "Power fluctuations in the containment field," Sable reported. "The entity is draining energy faster than our systems can compensate. Field integrity at 67% and falling." "Reroute all available power," Lyra ordered. "Everything except minimal life support." "That won't be sufficient," Sable calculated. "At current consumption rates, the field will fail in approximately 12 minutes. Lyra's mind raced through options, each more desperate than the last. "What if we use the fusion core itself, a controlled overload to strengthen the field?" "That would result in catastrophic damage to the ship," Sable warned, "and likely fatalities among the crew." Before Lyra could respond, Jade spoke up. "There's another way." Her voice was calm, resolved. "The auxiliary shuttle's reactor. If modified, it could generate a pulse strong enough to reinforce the containment field." "The modifications would have to be done manually," Sable pointed out, "from inside the shuttle." Understanding dawned on Lyra. "No, absolutely not." Jade met her gaze steadily. "It's the only way, Lyra. I can pilot the shuttle into position and make the modifications." "Whoever does this won't be able to escape the energy surge," Lyra argued. "I know," Jade said simply. The command center fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. "There has to be another solution," Lyra insisted, her voice cracking slightly. "There isn't," Jade replied gently. "You know that as well as I do. This is why we serve, Lyra, for moments when one life can save millions." The warning signals continued to blare as the containment field weakened further. Time was running out. With a heart heavier than she had ever known, Lyra nodded her permission. Jade squeezed her shoulder once, then left the command center without further words. Minutes later, the auxiliary shuttle launched from the Aurora's edge, Jade at its controls. She maneuvered the small craft to a position just outside the containment field. "Beginning modifications to the reactor," she reported over the comm. Her voice was steady, professional to the end. Lyra watched on the main display, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. "Captain," Sable interjected, "the entity's behavior is changing. It appears to be communicating." "What?" Lyra tore her attention from Jade's shuttle. "The energy patterns within the entity have shifted to a rhythmic sequence. It may be attempting to convey information." "Can you interpret it?" "Attempting to analyze," the AI responded. "It appears to be a distress signal." The revelation stunned Lyra. "It's in distress? Because of our containment field?" "Unknown. The signal began before contact with our field. It's possible this entity is not acting of its own volition." A new theory began to form in Lyra's mind. What if it's not a predator? What if it's being used by something else? Sable, analyze the dark radiation again. Could it be a control mechanism? As the AI processed this request, Jade's voice came over the comm. "Modifications complete. Reactor set for controlled overload. Containment pulse will deploy in 30 seconds. "Jade, wait," Lyra called urgently. "We have new information. The entity might not be hostile. It might be controlled." A moment of silence. Then Jade's voice, softer now. "Can you prove that in the next 20 seconds? because that's all the time we have before the containment field fails completely. Lyra looked at the readouts, confirming Jade's assessment. The field was collapsing rapidly. "No," she admitted, her voice breaking. "We can't prove it in time." "Then my course is set," Jade replied. "It's been an honor serving with you, Captain. Save them all." The comm went silent as Jade deactivated it from her end. Lyra watched, helpless, as the shuttle's reactor began to glow with increasing intensity. "Pulse imminent," Sable announced. "All personnel brace for energy surge." The shuttle's reactor detonated in a controlled but massive release of energy. The pulse expanded outward, reinforcing the containment field around the entity. At the same moment, the shuttle itself was consumed by the energy wave, disappearing from sensors in an instant. "Jade," Lyra whispered, though she knew no one could hear. The strengthened containment field held the entity securely, its writhing movements gradually subsiding. "Captain," Sable reported, "the entity's energy signature is changing. The dark radiation patterns are dissipating." On the main display, the amorphous darkness began to fragment, breaking apart into smaller components that resembled stellar material, more than the consuming void it had been. "It's returning to its natural state," Lyra realized. Whatever was controlling it has lost its hold. As they watched, the fragments of the entity began to drift back toward Helion Prime, reintegrating with the star's surface. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the star's luminosity began to increase. "Helion Prime is stabilizing," the science officer confirmed. "Stellar output increasing by 0.3% and rising." The command center erupted in subdued cheers, the victory tempered by the cost at which it had come. Lyra stood silent, her gaze fixed on the point where Jade's shuttle had been. A single tear tracked down her cheek before she mastered herself again. "Send word to Helion Pha," she ordered quietly. "Tell them their star is returning." In the days that followed, the Aurora's Edge remained in the Helion system, monitoring the star's recovery and assisting the planetary governments with relief efforts. The star's output continued to increase steadily, though scientists estimated it would take months to return to full brightness. Alliance headquarters, confronted with the success of Lyra's unauthorized mission, reluctantly acknowledged her actions. Chairman Vokan himself transmitted a formal commendation, though his expression remained stern. "The Scientific Council will want a full report on this Sky Eater phenomenon," he informed her. "And the military division is already discussing defense strategies should more of these entities appear." "They're not inherently hostile," Lyra countered, relaying Sable's analysis of the entity's distress signals. "Something was controlling them. Chairman, I believe they're part of the natural stellar ecosystem, perhaps even beneficial under normal circumstances." "Speculation, Captain," Vokan dismissed. "What matters is that we develop countermeasures." The conversation left Lyra troubled. The Alliance's immediate leap to militarization, rather than understanding, exemplified the very mindset that had led to the energy crisis in the first place: exploitation rather than coexistence. On her final day in the Helion system, Lyra visited the surface of Helion 4 once more. The increased stellar radiation had already begun to warm the planet, and emergency agricultural efforts were underway in the dome structures. Governor Tal greeted her with genuine gratitude. "The Alliance is sending additional support ships," he informed her. "We'll recover, thanks to you and your crew." His expression sobered. "And especially thanks to your pilot. Her sacrifice will never be forgotten here." Lyra nodded, unable to speak of Jade without emotion overwhelming her. She visited the Planetary Museum again, where the meteorite fragment with its ancient inscriptions was now the centerpiece of a new exhibition. Researchers had begun studying it with renewed interest, seeking to understand the paths of the Sky Eaters and the civilizations that had encountered them before. Dr. Varus joined her there, his dark eyes thoughtful as they examined the artifact together. "The indigenous species knew," he remarked. Their evolutionary memory preserved what our advanced technology overlooked, that there's a balance to the cosmos that we tamper with at our peril. The Alliance won't see it that way, Lyra replied. They'll view this as a threat to be controlled, not a system to be understood. Then perhaps that is the next great challenge for explorers like us, Varys suggested. Not just to discover what lies beyond our worlds, but to convince our own kind of the wisdom in coexistence rather than dominance. That evening, aboard the Aurora's Edge, Lyra recorded her official log in the privacy of her quarters. Beyond the formal report that would go to Alliance headquarters, she added a personal addendum. The Sky Eater incident has revealed a fundamental truth that the Alliance must confront. We are not masters of the cosmos, merely participants in its vast cycles. Our hunger for energy, our ceaseless consumption of resources, mirrors the controlled Sky Eater's consumption of Helion Prime. The difference is only in scale, not in nature. Jade Mercer gave her life not just to save a star system, but to teach us a lesson about sacrifice and balance. The question now is whether we will heed that lesson or continue our current path until we, too, become Sky Eaters of a sort, consuming without thought for the consequences. As we prepare to depart the Helion system, I cannot help but wonder, how many other cosmic balances have we disrupted in our expansion? And what other ancient warnings have we dismissed as mere superstition? The stars are not simply resources to be harvested. They are living entities in their own right, part of a vast ecosystem we have only begun to comprehend. Our survival as a species may well depend on our ability to recognize that fact before it's too late. Lyra ended her recording and moved to the viewing port in her quarters. Helion Prime shone more brightly now, its light gradually returning to the system. From this distance, there was no sign of the trauma it had endured, no visible indication of the sacrifice that had restored it. The Aurora's Edge would soon depart for its next mission, leaving the Helion system to heal. But something caught Lyra's eye as she gazed out at the stars, a faint distortion in the distance, barely perceptible against the backdrop of space. It moved with purpose, following an invisible current toward the outer boundary of the Alliance's territory. Another Sky Eater, perhaps, or something else entirely. The cosmos still held countless mysteries, and Lyra Oren intended to face them with newfound wisdom and respect. For Jade's sake, for everyone's sake. As the ship prepared for departure, Sable's voice came through the comm system. Course set for Alliance headquarters. Captain, awaiting your command. Lyra took one last look at Helion Prime, its light a testament to both cosmic resilience and human sacrifice. Engage, she ordered softly. Let's bring the truth home. Far beyond the reach of the Aurora's Edge's sensors, beyond even the knowledge of the Galactic Alliance, a cluster of dark entities moved through the cosmic currents, following ancient patterns inscribed in the very fabric of space-time. Not predators, not Sky Eaters by nature, but guardians of a delicate balance older than humanity itself. And somewhere among them, carried in currents of energy and light, echoed the essence of a pilot named Jade Mercer, who had given everything to preserve that balance, becoming in her sacrifice part of the very cosmos she had sought to protect. The stars shone on, oblivious to the dramas played out in their light, yet somehow subtly changed by them nonetheless.